Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, reporting from the palatial confines of Bahrain's International Airport. Rather belatedly, end of my trip. I always get behind with doing these video logs, which is a bit of a shame. And so now what I'm going to be talking about is what I did like a couple of days ago, through my penultimate day in India. So I got up rather late and made my way on the metro down to the south end of Delhi to a place called Qutb Minar. Now, Qutb Minar is basically the only major site in Delhi that I hadn't managed to see during my first trip there that I really wanted to see. And it's well worth seeing. It's like World Heritage Site. It's a world-class thing to witness. And I'd missed it out last time, so I wanted to check it out. But also, I'd agreed to meet up with Ghulam again. And so what we did is we agreed to meet up at the entrance gates of Qutb Minar. Now, he couldn't meet till about 3. And so what I did first was went to an adjacent site, the Mehrauli Archaeological Park. Now, I say it's an adjacent site. Realistically, I think it is the same site, but it's divided off because Qutb Minar is the kind of the showcase complex where there was this great mosque and the minar means tower, and it was a minaret for this mosque, and it's this enormous minaret from one of the earlier Islamic incarnations of Delhi. And I guess the Mehrauli Archaeological Park is what's left of the rest of that early city, and so it's not as world class in terms of the standard of the remains, but it's pretty damn well worth visiting. In my guidebook, which admittedly is 10 years out of date, because it's the one I had from my first trip, it says you have this bit of an undiscovered field, like you're basically walking through a jungle and coming across ruins. And there is a bit of that, although what I'm pleased to say is that the government has spent money doing parts of it up, and they've done it really well. So my tuk-tuk guy, he dropped me off. He said, "Oh, here it is." And it was literally like by a piece of waste ground. He's like, "Oh, it's over there." And I had to jump over a wall, and then I went in. Turned out I should have paid, and I got in free, but then I had to pay later anyway, so it wasn't really a bonus. And what I was confronted with was this beautiful pool with a kind of like an ancient boathouse or something on it, and then above it what looks like a Mughal era tomb. It was just pre-Mughal, and it was gorgeous, and that's all been done up in the last 10 years, and it was absolutely wonderful, and it was just this great place to wander around. And of course, when I got out of that area that has been done up, and that's the bit nearest to Qutb Minar, it is as the guidebook described, and that you're literally walking through paths in the forest, and you come across like this, pool or a well, a tank, I guess you would, with colonnades, and then there's this, ruined tomb above, and then there was a tomb that they'd done up to a certain extent, but then next to it there was what looked like a pretty similar one, but in a far greater state of disrepair, just in the forest, and you had to go off the path and have a little look around. And it was just wonderful. I was very tired. I don't know, I guess all the exertions of the last 3 weeks, they catch up on you, and it was warm, but I just loved walking through this forest and coming across all these ruins that aren't really very curated, not very visited, but it is that kind of, there was almost a bit of a like Indiana Jones or a Lara Croft thing where you're finding ruined civilizations in the jungle. But then, of course, you walk a little bit further along and you can see the edge of the city behind a wall. So but it was great. I absolutely. It was. Do you know what? I think that's my favourite place in Delhi, the Mehrauli Archaeological Park. And I returned to the original bit. Then I got stung for the ticket, 500, which annoys me because it's quite a lot of money. I'm sitting by Indian standards, although they don't charge the Indians that. But then I guess they have spent the money doing it up. So if you want history to be preserved, I guess you've got to pay for it. So anyway, it was quite interesting. So the boathouse on the river, it was called. I forget what it was called. It had an English name because I think it had been a tomb originally, and the local ruling English family had converted it to a boathouse, and they turned this area into pleasure gardens. And there was this unknown circular structure, and that's what it was literally called, the unknown circular monument structure. And they turned that into a cafe, and they think that the British had actually built it, and it was a kind of summer house or something. But it was wonderful. So in the centre was this cafe, and then all around were the chairs. So I sat there in the shade, read a bit. I actually fell asleep in there for the best part of an hour, and while I waited for Ghulam. Then I made my way to Qutb Minar, met him at the gates, and it was like a world of difference. There were so many people there, really rammed, and the tour groups were there, all the foreigners and that. But you can see why, because in terms of the actual quality of the monument, I mean, Qutb Minar is something else. This huge minaret, and apparently it was bigger, with gorgeous kind of carving on it. And then these remains of a vast mosque, and what looked like the base of a matching minaret. So there would have been two of these things, I'm thinking, at one time. And what's interesting about the mosque, and it's kind of horrible, but they said that they destroyed 27 idol temples to build it, and it looks rather Hindu. And they basically just recycled all the stones, so all the pillars have got like carvings. And generally, Hindu temples don't have arches so much; they tend to be like flat lintels. Whereas the Muslims were big for the arches, and this has remarkably few arches for a mosque. And it was incredible to see. It was a wonderful sight. I'm really glad I went there. But of course, what I most enjoyed was the fact that I went with Ghulam, and we literally sat there and had a chat for hours whilst the sun set slowly. And even though it was busy, because I was so engrossed in this conversation with he's a wonderful man, very spiritual guy, and a guy who I feel I'm on the same page as. It was a fantastic experience, maybe like the highlight of my whole trip. And where we sat actually was in front of an iron pillar. And I'm going to say something about this iron pillar because it's something I know from my childhood. So when I was a kid, like my dad was a vociferous reader, and he, when he was younger, got into the work of Erich von Däniken. Now, if you've never come across Erich von Däniken, he was a bit mad, but his famous one was Chariots of the Gods. And he had this theory that back in ancient times, aliens visited Britain, and they kind of aliens visited Earth, and they jump-started several civilizations. And so he would, look at temples in India and South America and Egypt, and you would see evidence of alien interference. And when you're about 8 or 10, it's very, very convincing. And for a while, I was a bit of a von Dänikenist, but that kind of fell apart pretty soon when I, reached adulthood. But, he would read stuff like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where there's this description of one of their heroes taking off in a rocket and leaving Earth, and it is actually quite remarkable. Like the language, it does sound like he was a guy who'd been off in a rocket, and and one of the pieces of evidence that von Däniken uses is this iron pillar, because it's an ancient iron pillar So it's like a millennium old, and it's never rusted. And apparently this is due to an exceptional purity of the iron and stuff. So it hasn't rusted. And he's like, well, it must be from aliens, because everything else in iron at that time rusted. Only aliens could have done this. And this, I guess, was the problem with Von Daniken. Like, individually, the things he says, like this thing from the Epic of Gilgamesh, kind of, they make sense, and you can see, but he just collected stuff from everywhere, and it didn't really fit together very well. And maybe they just managed to chance upon some exceptionally pure iron. I mean, I'm not an expert on these things, but I don't think it was an alien pillar. But it was nice to see this pillar that I'd seen pictures of in a book when I was a kid, and so there it is. And I literally sat in front of it for an hour or so talking to Ghulam, and what a fascinating fellow. And his spiritual journey, in some ways, I guess, mirrors my own a bit, in that he started off a pretty standard Muslim, and he got into Sufism, and he's become, does a lot of interfaith work, and he got very disillusioned with the kind of Salafist Wahhabist model. And my Christianity was far more standard. I was never a standard Christian. I don't think that's ever been the case. But it was far more, based on attending communion and, reading the Bible. And I was very skeptical about actually, worship involving other religions and stuff. I'd be nice to them, but still quite exclusivist. And he's gone on this journey through Sufism to the point that now he thinks he's a very Hindu Muslim. And he's married to a Hindu who converted to Islam, but she still lives as a Hindu because her family never accepted it, and so they, their child has been brought up Hindu, it's got a Hindu name, and she's living this kind of double life. And he's like, one of the things is, he says, but the problem is, he says, I'm probably more Hindu than she is now, because I quite like it. I could live as a Hindu. He says, I'll go vegetarian. I find God in the Vishnu temples, the Shiva temples and stuff. He said, but, she is probably more conservative Muslim than he is. And this is a kind of, when you go on a journey, you go and you don't know where that journey will take you, and I didn't know my spiritual journey would take me to the places where it has, necessarily. But of course, if you start off on a journey with somebody else, you may be at the same place, and when he, married her, they were very much at the same place, Muslim, but quite liberal, but still fairly orthodox. And then he's kind of gone off on this way, and she's gone off on that way, and she's more Muslim of the two, although she's technically a Hindu and he's technically a Muslim. So I think it's very interesting, and I guess I always use that analogy of trains. I remember once going from like Victoria to Clapham Junction, and a train ran side by side, and you could look in the window, and it was almost like you're in the same room, and then suddenly that train speeds up or it veers off, and it's lost forever. And everything is impermanent, I guess, and there's an example, like even our religious positions are impermanent. Where I will be in 10 years' time might not be where I am now, but it was fantastic to be in that moment and sit with Ghulam, and we were of one mind, and it was brilliant. So we did that, and then he took me to a place nearby, which is a Sufi Dargah. Obviously, he is a Sufi. But before we went there, we went in a Gurdwara, and it was the Baba Banda Singh Memorial Gurdwara. Now, Baba Banda Singh, a chap lived from 1670 to 1716. He was a disciple of Guru Gobind Singh, and he fought in a lot of battles against the Mughals. And in the end, he got captured, and there was this horrible period in Sikh history where the Mughals literally murdered 100 Sikhs a day. And he was one of them, and they forced him. They tried to get him to kill his son, and he wouldn't. So they murdered his son before him, and then in the end, when they murdered him, they gouged his eyes out, then severed his limbs, then skinned him before finally beheading him. And I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about. And we went to this Gurdwara, and although it's important, it's off the tourist trail. It's not like Shishganj, which is rammed with, passers-by and stuff. And it was just a lovely, quiet place, and we both sat there listening to the Guru Granth Sahib being recited, and then we made our way out and had a chat with a couple of Sikh guys outside about, what was the significance of the place. And I think that was where he was martyred. All I can find on the internet is he was martyred in Delhi, and I'm assuming it's in that place. Then we went to this Dargah. So it's the Dargah of Hazrat Qutubuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki, right? Now, he lived from 1173 to 1235. What's important is he was a successor to Muhyiddin Chishti. So Muhyiddin Chishti was the great Sufi of India. And years ago, I went to his shrine in Ajmer, and that's, if anyone's seen the film Jodha Akbar, that's the one that Emperor Akbar had a particular affinity to, and he went there to pray for his son. And that's the big Sufi shrine in India. But basically, Muhyiddin Chishti, he said to Qutubuddin Bakhtiyar, okay, go to Delhi and start a mission in Delhi. And this is, what he did. And his disciple then became the master of Nizamuddin Chishti, which is the great shrine of Delhi, the one that I went to 10 years ago. And it was the first Sufi shrine that really, really touched me, because I found Ajmer too busy. And Hazrat Nizamuddin is an incredible shrine, and they have beautiful qawwali singing there. So he was like, in spiritual terms, the granddaddy of Nizamuddin Chishti. And these Chistis were such an open-minded and love-infused order. And I think I asked Ghulam what kind of Sufi he was, and he said, well, he'd been initiated as a Naqshbandi, but he'd also been initiated as a Chisti, and I think he's probably more Chisti, because the Naqshbandis, and you might remember last year I met a direct descendant of the Naqshbandis in Pakistan, but they can be a little bit more austere and conservative, and I suspect that Ghulam's gone more towards the Chisti way because of where he is. And interestingly, this guy, Qutubuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki, comes from Osh originally, which is in the Fergana Valley, which is now split between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. I'm planning to go there in the summer, so I'm wondering if there's anything about that there. So many of these came from Central Asia, and 20 odd years ago I went to Central Asia. I went to Bukhara, the famous al-Bukhari is from there, and I wonder what I'll see. Quite excited about that. According to Ghulam, he's called Kaki because his mum used to tell him that if he prayed, God would give him some bread, and he should always look under the corner of his prayer mat. And of course it was her who put the bread there. But I have heard another bread story. Kaki means bread, by the way. Should have said that before. I have heard another bread-related story to him of miracles. But anyway, he's the bread saint. When we got there, it was down these back alleys, and sadly, the actual main shrine was locked. We'd come too late. But I found that quite powerful because we prayed at the door where there were candles burning, and sometimes the door is locked and you've got to wait for it to open, and that was the spiritual message that came through to me, and I actually wrote a poem there, and I could see him because you can look through this marble lattice at the shrine, so I did see the shrine, and I found it a powerful place, and it was a wonderful day, and I thank Ghulam completely for what a great day that was, and that is all for me, Uncle Travelling Matt. Keep travelling.